Thank you everyone for joining in today. Few things first, I just want to make sure that you can hear the audio and you can see the video. I'm sharing the presentation right now, so hopefully you all can see it. Along with me, I have Elise, who is monitoring the chat. But just a little bit about me. I've been with ClicData for quite some time now, almost 10 years, and I head the North American division of ClicData as the VP of Ops for NORAM. And today's goal is to just introduce everyone to this whole new module of data scripts. It is going to be a fairly technical session in the nature of it, talking about what data script is and why it's being used and why we have this module. We're going to cover into the technical topics of why we started it, what it is, and very soon we're going to move to actually using data scripts. The idea of today's webinar is to showcase some use cases when you can use data scripts, either a SQL based or a Python based, show you some demos on those, and also tell you a little bit about when to use which one. Since we have two engines on ClicData, what is the optimal engine and when to use it, and eventually followed by Q&A. The webinar is going to be recorded, so it's also going to be available on YouTube if you want to go back and look at it. So let's get started with just a basic idea of what is data scripts. In the simplest terms, it is the ability to write codes on ClicData. You can do coding on ClicData for SQL. You can do coding on ClicData using Python. Essentially, it is very similar to something that you might have been familiar with, the data flows on ClicData, but rather than using a UI based, we are going to use a coding engine or a script editor to actually write certain codes to essentially modify the data. The data script reads multiple inputs that you choose to have. It essentially transforms based on the code that you have written, and eventually it keeps on executing the script that you have given it. It's great to do windowed functions, cohort analysis, think about any complex machine learning algorithms, doing scorings, forecasting. This is a great way and a great segue into that. The reason why we have data scripts on ClicData is because we started realizing there's a need in the market where people are using a business intelligence tool or a data management platform like ClicData to connect different data sets, store that information, run data flows. But sometimes they have the need of going beyond just the basic data flows. Can we do forecasting? And the traditional approach would have been going outside ClicData, running that on R and SAS or other machine learning platforms, and then bringing the data back to ClicData for visualization. So we noticed there's a gap there where someone had to take that information outside of the platform. So is there a way for us to integrate it within the platform and provide that ability to all the users? And that's how DataScript was born. Essentially, we have a container running on the backend for dedicated accounts on ClicData so that they can execute scripts. The container runs those scripts. It's a powerful engine that runs a script that you have mentioned, and it sends the data back to your ClicData account so that you can start visualizing that information directly on the dashboard. So rather than going outside, we're trying to make everything available to you in one place. We'll get started with the first one, the data script for SQL. This is a new one that we released just a few weeks ago in our latest release. We started off with the Python side, but then we also wanted to make SQL available as one of the coding languages that you could use in ClicData. Why can you use DataScript for the SQL DataScript? I think there's a mix of customer base. There is a customer base who are getting started with SQL, or they're not familiar with SQL languages, and for them, Dataflow is a great place to get started on ClicData. It's a UI-based engine. But there are advanced users who might already be quite familiar with SQL. They have GitHub with code repository, or they might have SQL scripts that they have used on other platforms in the past, and they would not like to rebuild the whole thing using a data flow. So for them, this is a great option, because if you already have scripts written down somewhere, you can copy paste the scripts, make slight adjustments to fit ClicData's methodology, and you can use those scripts directly on ClicData. Data scripts are easy to audit as well. You have a script that you can read through it. You can quickly see what changes were done. We have version control, so you can see how previous versions look like. So that way, it's easier for you to understand what changes were done, at what point changes were done, and continue making a script efficient to work as per your business rules and logic. And eventually, I think any sort of cohort analysis, customer segmentation, ranking, historical data snapshots are a good way of doing through the scripts. What I'll do is let's get into a live demo so that you kind of understand what that data scripts using SQL does and how you can access it. So I'm going to go ahead and change my screen to ClicData so you all can see how to run data scripts on ClicData. For this entire scenario, we're going to use some data sets related to a call center. That's the use case I've gone with for SQL and Python. Think about a call center running calls on a regular basis, and typically the tables that they might have are call tables: which calls happened, when did that happen, who did the call, who was the call made to. So we have a few tables related to the call center, which we're going to start using for our demo today. The data script module on ClicData is accessible to all the accounts who are on a dedicated subscription with us. To access the data scripts, you go to the three tabs at the top, you click data scripts, and within that you have a similar structure like any other folders on ClicData in Teams and Personal, and you can click on add new to start adding your data script, creating your first data script. While adding the script, you have the three languages to choose from, actually two languages, Python and SQL, and there are two versions of Python that you can choose from. You start by giving a name to your data script. So this is my SQL demo 1. I choose the SQL engine because I like to use that SQL engine. And you're presented with a blank canvas or a code editor in the center with a few options on the left and right. Usually you're always starting off with input tables, like where do you want us to read the data from so that we can run certain scripts on top of that. So I can go ahead and choose, I want to read the call center data and the call table on ClicData. So this is the first input that I've given. I have a name for it. The reference name is called as input call table. I can go ahead and change it if I want to, but I'm going to leave the reference as it is for now. On the left-hand side, you have the ClicData language on how you can refer to these input tables or the output tables that you have placed. If you want to add certain calculations on your script, how you can do that. But it is an SQL engine, so you're free to use any SQL functions to go ahead and start writing your script. So let's write a basic script. I just want to do a select star from the call table that I have just imported. I do this, I click on run, and I'm starting off with a basic script of just reading the data from that particular table. And on the right-hand side, I can see the table, the script ran, this is the output on the left, and the results on the right-hand side. So that's the most basic way of just getting started reading something. You can now go further. I was like, yeah, I want to read this, but I only want where my department topic is equal to services. And I can go ahead and put in an additional condition. So I can start filtering the data, and you would see that I'm just writing SQL queries out here to start adding conditions to it and filter the data and go on and keep on building my query accordingly. So this forms the basics of getting started. We'll go ahead and just get into a bit more advanced queries. So I did have some things already prepped for this call. On this use case, what I wanted to do is I I want to do a select, but instead of just listing the number of rows, I would like to do a count of calls that have been done for each and every company. On my input side, I have four different tables: call table, company table. I know the information about my company is sitting on my company table, and the information for my call is sitting on my call table, and I would like to come do a join. I can write in a query, or I can even specify in plain text that I would like ClicData to write a query to select, to load the call table and join the call and company table. So if I do that, it's going to go ahead and write a query for me automatically. ClicData will go in, understand this is what you're trying to do. It does the join, what you have asked it to do. And since I asked it to a count of call, I have the total count of call, and I can go ahead and run this table, and I can get the total number of calls that I have on my particular data set. So this is the result on the right, and I have the total number of calls. This is just an introduction to kind of getting started with what you can do on SQL. But as I said, the idea is to start doing more complex things, not just limited things on SQL. So let's move on to another use case where we would like to do a little bit more complicated stuff. We're going with the same example where I have different calls, but instead of just displaying these raw table as it is, what I would like to do is I want to do a monthly metrics or a monthly ranking system for all the agents that I work with. And I would like ClicData to go ahead and create a table that runs a few aggregations, few calculations, and gives me, it tracks the monthly call volume by departments and by businesses and see the rank within them each month. So in a business context, what it will allow me to do is it will help me to focus staffing and training on high volume areas. It might help me to spot some early shifts that are happening and eventually guide the leadership team to review the information with rank context. So I'm going to go ahead and run this query for you. So as soon as I run this query, what I have now on the right-hand side is a monthly, starting off with the same data sets. I was able to go ahead and move that particular data set, group it on a monthly basis for each department and each business, understand how many calls they had, what was the average duration of calls, what is the volume, what's the share of the month. So I can now understand a bit more about each department. So it's going to start helping me to make some decisions or visualize that information on a dashboard to additionally make some decisions. At this point, what I've done so far is I've always run a query based on tables that we have on the inputs. We have not really pushed the data anywhere. We have not created an output table to start visualizing on the dashboard. We have not done any sort of cleanups. So the next stage I want to show you is how can we start pushing the data into an output table. To push any sort of data into an output table, you can define an output table on ClicData. You could say, I want to push the data into this particular data set. And once you select that, on the output side, you have another node available. And if I just click on this monthly service, it tells me how to refer to that particular table that I have just created here. I can go ahead and simply just do insert and push that data into that particular data set. So let's try doing that. I do have a script that I've written down so that we can go ahead and start pushing the data into an output table. So here I'm taking some information from my call table, doing some calculations, similar calculations that we had done in the past. But eventually what I would like to do is insert this into an output table on ClicData so I can visualize that information on a dashboard. Before I do that information, before I push that information onto my output table, what I've done is I've created a table here with the schema that I need. So let me just empty this table right now so we can see that it has no rows. Okay. So right now it has no rows. It just has a schema on how the data is going to be generated from a SQL script. Now that I have the schema and I have created a query that would insert the data into that particular data set, if I run this query, ClicData is going to go ahead and run the calculations, aggregations for you. And at the end of this, it's going to push that data into the output table that we have created. So as soon as this query is finished executing, still running, seems like a big query. Awesome. So now that the query is finished executing, I can go ahead and see that on this table, I was able to get that additional information calculated, grouped in the way that I want, and I can start using this on my dashboard directly. The table is based out of the basic tables which are listed on this folder, the call table, the company table, and I can set up an automation to run my source table every day at a specific time. But along with that, I can further say, once it runs the source table, I want ClicData to also run a data script. I'm just going to go ahead and add a data script. I can ask ClicData to add a new task and say, run a data script on a regular basis and choose the data script that it needs to run. And it's going to go ahead and run that particular data script once I add it. I don't know, I'm getting some unknown error right now, but I think it's fine. Anyways, now that this table has been inserted, I do want to talk about one more complex thing that you could do. Sometimes you don't want to go straight from your input tables to your output tables. You might want staging tables in between so that you can create temporary tables on ClicData and push these temporary tables, use these temporary tables for doing calculations, and then eventually push that information into an output table on ClicData. So I'm going to modify this query a little bit and say, I want to do some sort of a temporary table. So let's create a temporary table called as test demo. And instead of inserting into an output table, I would like to insert this information into a test demo. As soon as I run this, what happens is ClicData creates a temporary staging table that can be used on other scripts. Maybe one of your script is creating temporary tables. You don't want it to be stored on ClicData for other users, but you just want to create a temporary table so you can use that as a reference to a second part of your script. And these temporary tables get stored on your account into a section called as usage metrics. And we have a new section called as data script data. Uh, Here I can see there's a test demo that was stored as a temporary table. So this is just a temporary view that I just created. I can give a different name, say ABC, and if I run this script again, it's going to actually create another temporary table for me on that particular screen called as ABC as soon as it's done executing. And I have that as a temporary table, which I can use on other scripts. The use case typically here is you want to do something in stages, and rather than storing each and every step as an output table on ClicData, you want to create these temporary tables that can be used in future steps or even used on the same script in multiple places so that you don't want to run the whole script on your actual database every time. It's a temporary staging table that's available, and you can start using that temporary table in different areas of your script. You also have the ability to do certain cleanups. So you could say that, yeah, I want ClickData to create a temporary script, but I don't want to store it and keep. Maybe once a temporary script has been created, at the end of this whole script, I want ClickData to also clean up that temporary table that was created. And sorry, okay, I'm going to go ahead and create a new one. Yeah. So I want ClicData to also go ahead and clean up this new table that I've created, CCC. And if I run this particular script now, it's going to create a temporary table. Once a temporary table has been created, it's also going to clean up that particular temporary script at the end of that whole creation process. So that's a little bit about, I think, just getting started on what we can do on data scripts. If you have any questions on SQL data scripts, feel free to message us. If there are certain use cases that you want to know about, just put it on the chat and we can have a look at it. I'm briefly going to talk about some of the use cases where I've seen where we've been using SQL, something along the lines of you want to see first time customers versus monthly customers. You can do all of that on Dataflow, but I've just written down a script so that I can quickly analyze how many on a monthly basis, how many of the customers that I have are first time customers and how many are returning customers. So obviously in the first month, when we started, there was no returning customers. And as we go along, you can start seeing that the new customers are less and less, and the returning customers seem to be growing on a regular basis. And that's where the shift has been happening. Probably what it tells about this particular business is they've not been acquiring new customers after the initial batch of customers that they have acquired. And I can display that information on a dashboard or a chart. So the business owners can get a quick idea of what's happening on a regular basis on that business. The other example I had prepared was some sort of an agent performance where we would like to do medians by agent, understand how each and every agent has been doing. And this data has been sorted and grouped by an agent level in different departments. And I can quickly see the total number of calls, the medians, the P95 sec, the rank in the particular department. So what could probably have taken me some time to build on the dashboard or data flow, I'm just optimizing this whole process by having a code that does all of that for me, and now eventually displaying it on the dashboard. Sorry, I realized that I was not sharing my screen when I was trying to show you some other examples. So thanks for letting me know. I'm just going to run these examples again because it seems like I was in the PowerPoint presentation. But this was the example I was showing in terms of running first-time customers and returning customers. So I can quickly understand the number of calls happening and how many new customers I'm acquiring and what's happening out there. And the second example that I had shown was about agent performance to understand per agent. If I had to write a query that does medians, counts, averages, and puts that all together, this particular query would group my data for agent, do multiple joins, it's actually joining 4 tables to get all of that information. And for every agent, it's showing me the total number of calls and a median and the rank in each of the departments. So what could have possibly taken me a long time to do on data flow or think about it in multiple stages, I've just done it entirely in one single code. And if tomorrow someone wants to change how the medians are calculated or add conditions onto this, it's fairly easy because all they have to do is come to the code, come to the right section and say, yeah, instead of this, I want to do all of that, but I only want to do where the agent department is something, and just one change in the query and everything else is going to follow and work for you. Okay, so now that I've shared my data script things, I'm just going to try to see if I have some questions on the data script SQL before we move on to Python. So the first question I have is about data refreshes being used on SQL scripts. So if you're using SQL data scripts on ClicData, there are two metrics that you have. Typically, for every subscription on ClicData, you have the data refresh metrics, and you have another metrics called as the script runtime metrics. The script runtime metrics is if you're running a script for 1 minute, it's going to deduct 1 minute for that particular script execution. So my script that I was running previously took probably around 30 seconds for the whole script to be executed. And every time I run this script, 30 seconds, I would need 30 seconds to, it would consume 30 seconds from my data script runtime credits that I have. If I don't push this data anywhere, it's not going to use data refresh credits. But as soon as I have an output table, if I have not the temporary table, but if I eventually I'm inserting this into an output table on ClicData, every time I'm pushing it into an output table on ClicData, that is consuming one data refresh for me on that particular output table. So hopefully that answers the question on how many data refreshes are being consumed. The basic answer is every time a data is being pushed into an output table, what happens is we have to run a task to process the whole information. And because the task has been running on the backend, it is counted as a data refresh to reload that particular table, which is sitting on ClicData. I'm going to have a look at any other questions that I have. Can you clarify? The other question is in terms of limitations, what kind of limitations are there on SQL? This is how I'm understanding that question. But there's no limitations as such on SQL. You can use any SQL functions. Obviously, there are certain commands like commit transact or tran commands or delete commands that you won't be able to use. You can't delete the data set that is sitting on ClicData unless it's your temporary table by using SQL. But other than those, I think metadata changes and changes to the database itself, you're free to use pretty much all the commands on ClicData to go ahead and write your SQL queries. I'll take one more question before we move on to Python. I do want to spend some time in Python, and then we'll come back to these questions if required. So in terms of SQL, the other question I had was, is this feature available to everyone? Yes, this feature is available to everyone on ClicData, but only to certain subscription levels. Everyone who is on a dedicated subscription and above have access to this feature. The enterprise team and basic subscriptions don't have access to the feature because you need a database behind it to be able to run that SQL database. It is only possible if you have a dedicated database on ClicData, which stores and houses your data. And that's why the limitation of only available to certain customers who are on a dedicated subscription and above on ClicData. So let's move on to, I'll come back to a few other questions that we could not get to, but I do want to just briefly introduce you to the Python data script editor on ClicData. The Python data script is very similar to, again, the SQL engine of what you were doing on ClicData. Instead of writing SQL, now you're using Python. The advantages here is if you want to do any sort of forecasting, machine learning, statistical analysis, Python is a better tool in doing that rather than using SQL, which is more of a descriptive analytical tool, but rather Python is more of a predictive analytical tool that will allow you to do forecasting and use different models. With Python, you have the entire PyPy repository available for you to be used anywhere on the data script editor on Python while writing scripts on ClicData. The reasoning for Python, I think, is very similar to SQL. I was trying to put a slide in to explain why do you need a Python editor on why do you need a Python editor on ClicData? I think, except for the fact that it allows you to do forecasting and it doesn't, you don't need to go outside to other tools. I think the idea is the same as an SQL. It's fast to build, it's easy to audit, it is seamless, it supports multiple packages that you can use, and you're using a code that probably the data scientist is familiar with. It's not a new code, it's a widely used code. So you have enough references online to kind of understand what you're doing and what the possibilities are here. So let's jump to a live demo again and show you how we can start doing Python scripts on ClicData. The screen is the same. You have the data script screen, and while loading something, you end up choosing Python 3.12, 3.13, or SQL. So I have a basic script started off. So I'm just going to start by loading that particular script. And what I have here is I have decided what packages I might want to use. You can go ahead and just type the name of the package that you want to use and the version of the package. It is the PyPy package that you're going to go ahead and use on ClicData. You can start defining, very similar to SQL, what kind of input tables you want onto that particular Python editor, the Python script that you're writing. Select the table of your choice. If I want a call table or if I want some other table, you can go ahead and choose those tables. And once those tables are selected, that table is available for you to be able to use on the Python editor. You have the same level of functions. I'll just open the SQL editor to kind of show you the difference between these functions that we have. So the SQL editor would have data script functions like input and output and parameters, but also support functions which are SQL compatible. Whereas in the Python, same idea, you have different functions, inputs and outputs, but now you're writing a Python code rather than writing a SQL script. You can go ahead and import pandas and go write that particular script. If you want to start reading a data set, you can just say df equals to that particular input call table, get the particular frame, and that way I'm choosing the particular frame that I want to read on ClicData, and that is I'm just loading that particular data set onto the ClicData environment to get started. So let me go to an example that I have prepared for now. Yeah. So here what I'm doing here is I'm just doing a basic load. I want to load a particular table, and once that table has been loaded, I would like to just print that table onto ClicData. The first time you load the Python editor, you'll see there is an engine that is starting up. You have, again, that idea of runtime if you're using Python 3.12, 3.13. Based on your dedicated database that you have, you will an engine is allocated to your account, and that particular engine just sets up for the first time when you're loading this Python script. So I'm going to wait for a few more seconds for it to load. And until that is loading, I'm going to just have a quick look if there are any questions that I can answer. I guess waiting during a demo. Okay, let's move to another one. Okay. So instead of running the Python script, I'm just maybe there's some maintenance happening right now. But on this example, what I've done is I wanted to show you some examples of doing forecasting on Python. So if you have a table already on ClicData, you can just go ahead and use this Ask AI feature to help you start writing a code. What I would like to do is I want to, based on the call table, I want to do a forecasting. I can ask ClicData that do a forecasting for the next 6 months based on my call table and predict the. So just given a basic command for now, and based on that particular basic command, it's going to go ahead and start writing a script for me. The AI generator is as good as the prompt that you give in. So uh, if you want to if you wanted to use a specific model, go ahead and give that particular model. So right now it seems like it did end up using some exponential model, but if you know that's not the right model, or you wanted to not just use one model, I want to do a forecasting for calls and give me results in at least 3 models or something. It's going to go ahead and try to give you results in at least 3 models, and that way you're not limited to one model. So you can get information in 2 to 3 models, and you can run that particular query to see which model fits you better. Yeah, it went ahead and did some exponential model, ARIMA model, linear regression model, and all these can be pushed into an output table so that I can see the results of each of the model before I end up taking certain decisions. So you can get into very, I would say, advanced statistical analysis while running Python scripts. And using this AI generator is a great way to get started if you're not familiar with what's the starting point for you. You don't have to know everything on Python. Just make sure you put in the right query, and ClicData is going to go ahead and start generating that information for you. Well, I'll I'll go back to any questions on Python that you might have at this stage. This It's very similar to SQL. The last thing I want to cover is when to use SQL and when to use Python. But if there are any questions that users have on the Python side, I can go ahead and answer that. I just have one question right now: is if you can if you can plot on the Python editor on ClicData. So no, the Python editor on ClicData is not meant for plotting charts or displaying information. Typically, the idea behind the Python editor is to use Python code to be able to generate an output file that can be stored on ClicData, and eventually that particular output file can be used on the dashboards on ClicData. The plotting mechanism goes back to the analytical layer on ClicData that you have available. I'll show you an example of something that we're doing. Let me just go ahead. So here, what we've tried to do is a forecasting, and instead of displaying the forecasting, the top level is just trying to analyze existing information. What's happening? Are there seasonal patterns? Are there any distribution of quantities? Are there distribution of transform quantities? And once that is done, once the analysis of the existing data has been done, we would like to forecast for the next 6 months. And I did the same example. Instead of running one particular model, we ran it against a few different models. And based on the few different models, we wanted to see what's the forecasting for each of those models that we're running. And so rather than fixating on one specific model, you can start seeing, if I run a ridge model, how does the forecasting outcome change? If I run a decision model, how does that change? If I'm running a linear regression model, how does that change? And comparing one model to the other model to get a score, a decision tree, and eventually applying that whole thing onto a dashboard and displaying that with a combination of existing data and also doing a forecasting. So this is the final output that you would go from. You started with the input data, you did some forecasting, you made sure that the model is the right model that you want to work with, and eventually you're displaying that information onto a dashboard. along with their existing data so that people can see what's the historical and what's the future looking like. I'll take other questions. Can you store information into file storage as CSV? Yes, you could store information into file storage as CSV, and use you can even use the data that you're having on your file storage to refer onto the model. So I had a scenario where I wanted to use information from a PDF file while running Python. You could, as long as you know enough on how to write that particular information, you could go ahead and use that as well. So let's see if I have an example of file storage. No, I don't have an example for that, but the short answer is yes, you could use that as well. Okay. I'm trying to see if there's any other question. So we have a question about if the runtime credits only apply to Python or anything else. Yeah. The runtime credits only apply to Python and they don't apply to SQL. So that's one question we had. Okay. I guess that's pretty much it. For all the questions we had, the last slide I want you to take away with is Python versus SQL, when to use which. So SQL is great if you're doing data grouping and cohort and just some sort of data persistence checking. But Python is great if you're doing any sort of machine learning forecasting. If your task is to group, cohort, rank, use SQL. If your task is to just create history tables, use use SQL. But if your task is to kind of use more robust stats, then you should go ahead and start using Python for any sort of feature engineering, forecasting, scoring. But there is another approach. Since everything is a task on ClicData, you're not limited to using SQL or Python. There could be an entire workflow that you could do where you're loading the data on ClicData, running a SQL first, then running a Python, and eventually pushing an output from your Python into a dashboard. So a hybrid method could also work in many cases where you're starting off with one point, doing multiple elements, and eventually pushing that information into an output table. So that's all from me today. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's webinar. It definitely was a little bit more on the technical side of things, but hopefully you had enough to take away from it, kind of start thinking of what areas you want to use SQL and Python on your ClicData environment, and hopefully start doing more advanced analytics that could be helpful for you or your clients. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.